Accelerating progress on climate action will require significant resources. Therefore, private sector has to play an important role to play. I believe that the choice we make today for climate finance will be critical and beneficial for the future. I would like to thank you for hosting this event with UNESCAP, and before we continue with another speaker, I also have some presentation that I would like to share with you on SDG and what ESCAP has done to achieve that goal together with you. Yes. So as the name implies, SDG acceleration. So I just want to give some overview of how we review the SDG progress 4 years on since 2015. As we know, right, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we saw it in the video, very inspiring, that it is a very good goals that we should pursue. Before the Sustainable Development Goals, the world had seen the thing called Millennium Development Goals. So you may say, what is the difference? Why Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals? First, we need to continue Millennium Development Goals because Millennium Development Goals started in the year 2000 up until 2015. And it has been claimed more or less successful in terms of lifting people out of poverty, addressing inequality. But the difference is that Millennium Development Goals were targeted at developing countries, so it's not inclusive, it's not worldwide. And it feels like it is a prescription by developed country on developing countries to achieve Millennium Development Goals. Why should it be just developing countries doing so? It should be everyone in the planet. So that is the reasons why the world, more than 190 countries adopted Sustainable Development Goals in 2015 with even a comprehensive set of goals. And it was adopted at the General Assembly in 2015. And as I mentioned, it was reviewed this year at the General Assembly in 2019. So SDG, in summary, go beyond the MDG of just poverty reduction, human capital development, and reversing environmental degradation. It is a very wide goals with so many targets, so many things to achieve. But people say that despite its ambition, it's a very ambitious goals, how are we gonna achieve those? And for your information, these goals consist of the goals on poverty, planet, people, peace, and partnership. They, as you can see, that it ranges from focusing on people, right? Poverty, hunger, well-being, quality education, equality, to as wide as the environment, the environment, the economic side, and especially the partnership side, which is goal 17, which is an important one. Climate finance, you can see that it's on goal 13, but actually environmental issues are embedded in various goals. It actually also embedded in goal 12 on responsible consumption and production. How can you reverse the trend in climate change if you don't have responsible production, if banks do not lend responsibly, if you do not produce or consume responsibly. It's also embedded in other goals like life below water, life on land. So you can see that environment is everywhere in many of the goals. So the question is 4 years on and we have 11 years left. How are we going to achieve this 2030 target? So ESCAP produced a publication to assess ourselves how far we have gone in terms of making progress towards the SDG. And if you notice, this is a target in 2030. We're not actually achieving the targets at all. Yeah? In fact, it has been assessed that Asia Pacific will miss every single goals by the 2030 deadline, given the current rate of progress. So we're not going to achieve any goals. Some goals in particular are particularly bad in terms of, for example, responsible consumption and production, clean water and sanitation, decent work and economic growth, for example. But it doesn't mean that other goals are doing well. The one that is fairly on track are on poverty, zero hunger, good health. These are the ones that we already do fairly well in the Millennium Development Goals. And Goal 17, Partnership for Goals, this calls for means of implementation like finance, data, technology to achieve such ambitious goals, and it also needs to be stepped up. We have assessed several sub-regions. SCAP has 5 sub-regions. We are a regional commission which cover 53 member states, covering 5 sub-regions. We are in South and Southwest Asia sub-region, so I just want to bring out this sub-region. It seems that this sub-region is doing well on decent work and economic growth, good health and well-being, fairly okay, but it lags behind in the very topic that we're talking about today, on climate action, clean water and sanitation, and also responsible consumption and production. So it is a very good time to review and step up the progress towards these lagged behind goals in this sub-region. I also would like to highlight 2 goals out of the 17 where most of the sub-regions need to reverse current trends. And one is on decent work and economic growth. Another one is on the climate action. Again, on the South and Southwest Asia, there seems to be the need to step up this goal. And same as East and Northeast Asia. Another 2 environmental goals where all sub-regions are making little progress are Goal 14 and 15, life below water and life on land. North and Central Asia is also mostly landlocked, so some data may not be available, but from the available data that we have, it needs to be step up the progress. So given all this, SCAP and the UN in general have stepped up significantly the financing for development agenda. We have Sustainable Development Goals agenda, we need finance to finance them. Secretary General even issued a roadmap on financing for development at the global level. SCAP ourselves also as a regional commission to the UN, we are the largest intergovernmental body in the Asia Pacific, covering 53 member states. So we also have our own financing strategy. And our financing strategy span three broad areas. First, of course, SDG is the overall objective. We would like to encourage investment or infrastructure that is inclusive, with ensure universal access to basic services. Would like to make sure that they are sustainable. Basically, you should have infrastructure or investment that wouldn't compromise the future generation. You should also have investment or infrastructure that protect the citizen from climate change, from disaster related, because Asia Pacific is actually the most disaster prone in the world. Second is that we often talk about private sector doing this, private sector doing that. Public sector are not excused from taking action. So SCAP would like to ensure that the governments in Asia Pacific also has appropriate selection and implementation of investment, that we can expand public financial resources in the most efficient and equitable manner. So basically, public sector spending should be efficient. It's not about fighting more finance. It's also about being efficient in the resources that you have. The third pillar of the financing strategy is to encourage private sector engagement. This is very important. And it is truly a trend in the UN. Okay, partly because we need 1.5 trillion per year to finance investment gap. and we're not making any, it's very large, and 900 of that is actually infrastructure. 900 billion per year, if you look about it, it's more than twice the GDP of a middle income country. So that's not something that is not small. So private sector needs to step up, but then the public sector needs to provide incentives for them to enable them to do so. I believe that private sector is not here to achieve the SDG for SDG good. We need to create a win-win solution for the public and the private to achieve our common goals. However, despite at the UN really promote private sector engagement, private sector seem interested, but the fact is that it is not going well. Right? So we have the trend in private sector engagement. This is an example of investment in infrastructure covering water, sanitation, energy, ICT, transport. It's actually declining. And South and Southwest Asia is actually declining significantly. You can see from the purple one, it's actually more than 50% decline, together with North and Central Asia also experience a decline. So we need to do something about that. We have talked that we should step it up, but the fact is it is stepping down. So for these reasons, SCAP has played a key role in trying to leverage private finance for sustainable development. I'm glad that there's a lot of private sector here also. Through three things. First is our infrastructure financing and PPP network of Asia Pacific. Second is we encourage the development of sovereign bonds, sovereign green bonds in the region. We also promote private sector investment in climate change mitigation and adaptation. So I would like to draw your attention to also this network that SCAP is currently undergoing. It is called Infrastructure Financing and PPP Network. But it's very, very relevant for climate change, climate finance, because the infrastructure investment that we promote must be sustainable and climate resilient infrastructure. So this network, actually Sri Lanka is part of it. Sri Lanka is actually very active in SCAP work, which I am very happy to receive. Sri Lanka is one of the early members of this network since we initiated it in 2018 by the PPP unit of the Ministry of Finance. So they've been coming to the network meeting in all of them. So this network, what it is about, it's about basically developing South-South cooperation, peer learning among PPP units in the region and also infrastructure finance specialists and the private sector. So we have a private sector elements where we will provide, accumulate, and centralize infrastructure resilient, climate resilient infrastructure projects into this online database where private sector can see and fund your investment. And we have had already 3 meetings so far over the last 3 years with 30 network members in Asia Pacific. 23 early stage pilot project and demonstrations have been presented at the network, and we hope to take these projects forward to be presented to private sector of the network. So given this, I hope that Sri Lanka will continue to be part of the network and that we can embed many climate resilient infrastructure investment in the network. Those are the 3 network meetings that we had, one in Ningbo, China, one in Guiyang, again China, and then another one in the Philippines. The government of China supported this network very actively. You know there's a BRI and they also want to have projects that are environmentally friendly. Hence, huge support by the Chinese government. Second is we promote sovereign bonds, sovereign green bonds in developing countries. So far, Fiji, Indonesia, Hong Kong have issued sovereign green bonds. The next, we hope it would be Bhutan, where we have helped them develop their first sovereign bonds, sovereign green bonds, hopefully next year. And Bhutan is one of the greenest country with that reputation. Last but not least, of course, we encourage climate work on climate finance. We have ongoing regional survey on green financial institutions covering more than 8 countries, where ICC has been our close partner to distribute such survey. We hope that you would help us fill in this survey so that we have some backup research in terms of doing more guidelines on what banks should do in terms of lending, what do banks take into consideration. And our latest climate finance initiative was in Hong Kong last month, I mentioned earlier. Very dynamic and would like to take this work forward. So with that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you too, Dr. Subbanij, for sharing with us the broad range and scope. On the one hand, we can appreciate better the nature of the problem and also how some are dealing with the solutions toward dealing with those exigencies. As has already been mentioned, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka is a constituent in this whole arrangement and drafting and crafting a roadmap, as was mentioned, and we are very happy to have their perspective now, voiced by Dr. Veerasinghe, who's here with us, and obviously his background is in economics, and he read for his master's in economics from the Australian National University as well as his PhD, and he's an alumnus of the University of Kelaniya. And he's also, in his capacity, while serving with the Central Bank and the International Monetary Fund, also has served in Bangladesh and Bhutan. And he served with the Central Bank of Sri Lanka as a deputy governor for a few years and currently is a senior deputy governor. And he also is the chairman of the Monetary Policy Committee, and he has represented several cabinet subcommittees on economic matters as well. Interestingly, he continues his interest in academia by serving as a visiting research fellow at his old university, at the Australian National University. But now, let's invite Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe as a guest of honor to address this audience.
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, thank you very much for the kind introduction. And also, indeed, it's a great pleasure to be here and to be a participant and share some of the ideas that we are promoting on this agenda. First of all, let me thank the chairman ICC, Mr. Dinesh Kodi, and the ICC for organizing this event. Your Excellencies, the invited distinguished guests, participants, and all the other participants and guests. So let me start with, I think there are 2 presentations gave us a very good background, and it certainly helps me to take it forward towards a kind of our perspective, such as from Central Bank of Sri Lanka and also from the country perspective. We are seeing the global perspective already. So we all aware of the unprecedented climate changes that we already talk about and the adverse consequences. So I think I don't need to talk about it in detail because it's already covered. Let me focus on the agenda that we are basically promoting, what we call Central Bank's roadmap for sustainable finance in Sri Lanka. This is one of the initiatives that we have, we introduced some time ago, and that it's indeed great pleasure to see that our stakeholders are coming on board and supporting this initiative. especially the ICC, the private sector the stakeholders, and already bankers are in, academics are in, and obviously regulators, all three regulators are with us in this roadmap. So the central bank has recognized its role in supporting financial sector stakeholders and guiding financial institutions to effectively manage environmental and social risks in the business ventures that they finance and promoting finances towards greener and climate-friendly economic activities. When it comes to financing, what's most important is basically from the financing point of view, the assessment of environmental and social risks, and price that risk into your business and then promote that business. That is one of the key objectives of when it comes to financing the climate financing agenda. So with that, towards that end, in 2016, at the beginning, central bank joined what we call Sustainable Banking Network of the World Bank subsidiary, what's called International Financing Corporation, IFC, with a view to promoting sustainable finance practices in Sri Lanka. So first step that we did from central bank is to be a member of this global network, what we call SBN, Sustainable Banking Network, in 2016. And following that, being a member, then in 2017 we conduct very high-level workshop attended by His Excellency the President at the central bank as a chief guest, and that indicated a strong political will in promoting sustainable financing in our country. So that was the kind of a top-level priority that was given to this agenda. At the announcement of the roadmap of central bank, this other instrument that we do at the central bank is every year we announce what we call roadmap. So in 2019, the roadmap of Central Bank Sri Lanka, we indicated our intention to promote sustainable finance in Sri Lanka and encourage all stakeholders to formulate their own sustainable financing policies. I think this is part of that our appeal and the announcement that now I'm very happy to see that the other stakeholders are coming on board. The roadmap was prepared especially in consultation with relevant government agencies and financial sector stakeholders, all financial sector stakeholders, with the support from international partner agencies. This is a combination of the local stakeholders, international stakeholders, and the central bank. Especially I have to recognize the financial support given by one of the UN agencies, what it's called Biodiversity Financing Initiative, BioFin of the UNDP. They provided necessary financial assistance to develop our roadmap, and we launched this roadmap in April 2019 at the SBN Sustainable Banking Network global meetings in Washington DC when we were at for the IMF World Bank meetings, and then that event attracted global attention and recognition on Sri Lanka's efforts in achieving sustainability. The same roadmap which was introduced in Sri Lanka, it happened in June 2019. Now it's available in our website. I would encourage all the people who are interested in this roadmap, read it carefully and go through this as a very clear time plan and strategies. The roadmap provides a broad direction to financial regulators and financial institutions, both regulators and financial institutions, to effectively manage environmental, social, and governance. There are three areas: environmental, social, and governance risks associated with the projects they finance, and promote assistance to business that are greener, climate friendly, and socially inclusive. That's why this is a much broader concept. Environmental, social, and governance. All three elements are there. The roadmap also intends to scale up the contribution of different sectors in the finance system, such as banking and finance, the capital markets, the regulator is also here, the SEC, and insurance industry, and also help building more resilient and sustainable green economy. This is one of the issues why there's a lack of progress in achieving all the several stages, is the lack of resources. This plan will pave the way in mobilizing resources, particularly financial resources required to achieve sustainable development goals. I think this is very important, and one of the reasons why lack of resources are already highlighted here. The roadmap itself presents an action plan for each strategic activity, which shall be implemented during short, medium, and long. There are three categories of timelines: short term, medium term, and long term. There is a long kind of roadmap by all the stakeholders. Based on this action plan, Central Bank is now in the process of operationalizing the roadmap in line with stipulated timeframes and targeted actions. We are now considering issuing relevant regulations. As a regulator, our responsibility is to issue regulations and directions to incentivize financial institutions to practice sustainable financing activity. And going forward, we are contemplating to ensure greater connectivity with the regulatory and non-regulatory stakeholders like the ICC. Regulatory, we are basically coordinating with them, other regulators, to reinforce the shared responsibilities and commitments in relation to sustainable financing. Let me just briefly tell you the key elements of the roadmap. There are roadmap articulates a series of strategic activities to implement sustainable finance practices in Sri Lanka. These strategies revolve around 6 focus areas. There are 6 focus areas. First one, financing vision 2030. I think that's one most important one. As we have seen here, this financing constraint is the key. And then ESG integration into financial markets. So financing is not sufficient. You have to integrate economic, social, and governance practices into financial market practices. And third one is in the social part is the financial inclusion. When it comes to Sri Lankan situation, this is quite important. The promoting financial inclusion is one of the reasons why this can't be implemented effectively and efficiently, because of the lack of weaknesses in financial inclusion. Then fourth area is capacity building. Obviously, these are some kind of forum. There are a lot of other plans how to enhance the capacity of the stakeholders and institutions to promote this agenda. Then obviously, fifth one is the international cooperation. And like we are working with IFC, the UN agencies, and other agencies. There are strategic activities in this area as well. And last one, most important one, is the measurement and reporting. So one of the constraints, even the lack of progress, is the challenge is to not having proper instrument for measurement and reporting of this green or climate activities or sustainable finance activities. There are 6 areas. Under each of these focus areas, the roadmap articulates certain actions and policies that should be fulfilled by the financial sector regulators and financial institutions. I have to highlight here, this is only focus area on financial sector, both regulators and institutions. There is a much broader national agenda. I talk about it separately later. For this, we have, as I mentioned already, there are short-term, medium-term, and long-term targets and objectives. Let me just briefly talk about what are the challenges and issues in achieving the expected outcome. So, this is important to understand challenges, as we have already seen when SDGs were announced in 2015 by the UN, and after 4 years now we see a lot of challenges. Because of challenges, we have not been able to achieve the expected outcomes. And let's just briefly let me discuss briefly about the challenges, issues, and expected outcomes, and also some measures to overcome all those challenges. Especially in the case of Sri Lanka, there are 3 challenges I would like to highlight here. The first, as I mentioned already, lack of funding for sustainable projects and lack of understanding. There is lack of funding for projects, sustainable projects, and the second one is lack of understanding of different players. That's where the capacity building comes in. Although financial institutions are willing to finance the projects, they are hindered from doing so as the many projects are not properly structured. So for financial institution to finance a project, that has to be properly structured, especially when it comes to sustainable finance. That is a much more complicated project financing. It's not a simple project. Therefore, on one hand, one should be able to identify appropriate projects for funding. On the other hand, it is required to increase the private sector participation through equity financing options. In fact, people should be made aware that sustainable green projects make good investment as they generate attractive and long-term returns and drive them to exploit funding opportunities that are available, especially with international agencies. This is important 2 points here. First one is These are not CSR projects. You have to understand. These projects should be able to generate sufficient return that investors are willing to invest. That's an important part. Second one is how to exploit the funding opportunities, limited funding opportunities available globally. As already mentioned, there are a lot of funding available in Germany and some other place like UNESCAP. But how are we are to prepare to attract and tap those financial sources available globally? One example is the IFC. Acts as a catalyst in the local financing market for sustainable green projects. The IFC, we are working on that. Their program provides for an advisory service. This is one of the capacity constraints, so that IFC is now willing to help us to provide an advisory service and risk-sharing facilities to local private banks, where the advisory services include working with various stakeholders to enhance awareness and knowledge. At the same time, the IFC has been instrumental in the issuance of green bonds. Like now, I am happy to hear that the SCAP also have these initiatives. They are also instrumental in issuing green bonds in many countries. We also may seek assistance, especially to the SCAP and as well as IFC, for us to develop the guidelines for issuance of green bonds. That is one of the constraints that we are facing right now. The second key issue in the challenge is a lack of capacity, particularly in relation to analytical tools and expertise in identification and assessment of the risks and opportunities of sustainable green projects. With the assistance of local and foreign experts, our Center for Banking Studies, Central Bank has a training now, what they call Center for Banking Studies, has already developed necessary curriculum and is conducting comprehensive awareness and capacity building program to educate stakeholders. In our next year planning, or several years going forward, the capacity building in this area is going to be one of the key components in our training modules that those are offered by the Center for Banking Studies for financial sector stakeholders. And also I want to mention here now some of the other, for example, the University of California, about 2 weeks ago I participated that. They are also now on boards helping us to do research and also capacity building from the academic point of view. So they issue a journal about 2 weeks ago which is focusing on green financing by the Department of Finance at the University of California, and now they are also helping us to going to collaborate with this exercise on capacity building and conducting research in this area. The third area is the lack of appropriate regulatory and legal framework. This is an issue. So this is why we are now trying to develop this, because this is at the beginning of the journey. At the international level, also there's lack not only in Sri Lanka, in global levels also. For example, now what we call Basel Committee, which is a standard regulatory setting body globally, Basel Committee. Now, there also standards are being developed in relation to sustainable green finance activities. They have developed all what they call Basel III, the banking practices, the guidelines, all are there. And that's what we are now implementing, what we call Basel III. But those guidelines still wouldn't have what we call the sustainable, in relation to sustainable green finance activities. That's where now they are looking at revising or incorporating those guidelines into their standard settings. The recently issued, the other one area is World Bank, IMF, the Global Financial Stability Report that was issued recently by the IMF. That also highlight the several countries and regions are in the process of developing a set of new regulations. There are separately, countries are also working parallelly to develop this. In our part also, our central bank is developing that. We are also in the process of devising necessary regulatory frameworks, and our bank supervision department colleagues are here, are also working on that to develop to implementation of our roadmap, developing necessary regulatory framework to ensure that financial sector participants attach a greater focus on sustainable financing practices. This is from the kind of the challenges and how we are trying to mitigate those risks or address those challenges. And other broad area that basically in the same agenda is how we are trying to attract some attention from the monetary and fiscal policy. That's also part of the government, especially when it comes to monetary policy, central bank responsibility, and the fiscal policy is obviously the Minister of Finance government. There's a growing consensus that climate-related risk and mitigation policies, as already the earlier president highlighted the role of the government, mitigation policy should be embedded into current central bank mandates and objectives. On the monetary policy side, there's a growing kind of the agreements that climate finance risk should also be embedded into central bank mandates. I think I can say about a month ago we had a 19 central bankers governors conference here in Sri Lanka, where one of the themes of that is to how to incorporate the climate risk into central bank mandates. That was basically at the initial stage. I'm sure Bank of Thailand also gave already done some work there. The increasing number of central banks have already opted green financing policies or guidelines, like what we have done, or have started to incorporate climate risks into their policy frameworks, central bank frameworks. This has led to launch initiatives, and there are several initiatives already mentioned about. There's one thing I would like to mention is what you call the Central Banks and Supervisors Network for Green and Finance System, NGFS. This also, there are a large number of central banks are members of this network. So that also is a collaborative effort by the central banks globally to promote this agenda. On the monetary policy side, the policies also may include developing central banks' own climate risk assessments. So we also have our risk management framework. We would like to incorporate that into our climate risk assessments and ensuring that climate risks are appropriately reflected in central banks' collateral frameworks and asset portfolios. We are in our resource management. We are now one of the things that we are going to looking at to incorporate in our asset portfolios, investing in green financing projects or assets. Monetary policy instruments to promote climate finance may include. So there's one suggestion already at the beginning asked, why don't we allocate like agriculture 10%, 5% for sustainable finance? I think that's a good idea, but there are much more effective instruments that have already been identified to promote this. One, for example, now I know some central banks are already implementing similar instruments. Basically, one is a differentiated rediscount rates and capital or reserve requirements. So now we have reserve requirement for commercial banks, and we can have a different level of reserve requirements to encourage this kind of climate finance, to incentivize green lending. The central bank can also use their convening power moral suasion to encourage financial institutions to consider climate and environmental risks in their operation. That's what roadmap is all about. Then financial instruments to promote climate finance revolve around green supporting and brown penalizing factors in capital requirements. So the capital requirements is one of the instruments. The requirement of capital, we can differentiate the requirement capital for these activities. And on the financial policy side, tools may include, as I said earlier, reserve, liquidity, and capital requirements. And one other one is a loan-to-value ratios that we are using already for certain other purposes. We can use that as well. And caps on credit growth. The growth in credit, you can impose certain caps on environmentally hazardous areas. There's a caps on credit growth. Corporate governance reform, that's on the governance side. And better categorization of green assets based on standard and also standards taxonomy. I think we have a separate panel I will discuss in detail on taxonomy side. In addition, central banks can request financial institutions to focus on climate-related stress tests. So when you do business, your balance sheets can be stress tests on climate-related risks. So that's because we know Sri Lanka is one of the top rank in terms of climate risk countries. Those are vulnerable to climate risk. That's one area that you look at the balance sheet and conduct a stress test, how that would, any event of climate adverse event would affect your balance sheet. And also disclosure requirements and data dissemination. To enhance this risk assessment, you need information that we are going to ask the banks to have those disclosure requirements as well. And on those are monetary policy and central bank side. On the fiscal side, that is from the government side, it also can do certain things. For example, the use of fiscal instruments to attain environmental objectives have now become very popular. Now we have seen a lot of countries, for example, feed-in tariffs and similar support mechanisms remain the primary driver in boosting market growth of renewable energy in some countries. Moreover, the successful carbon taxes, this is one of the instruments for fiscal side is to have carbon taxes. But unfortunately, our carbon tax, there was one, this probably it was removed recently. Various fiscal measures such as taxes, charges, subsidies, incentives, and budget allocations could help green specific private sectors such as the energy, water, and transport sectors. Now, one of the challenge here again on the fiscal side when it comes to Sri Lanka is obviously the role of fiscal policy and public finance is important, but given the limited resources, one of the key challenge we have on macroeconomic policies constraint is that the limited fiscal resources and governments is running high fiscal deficits, debt levels are high. So financial resources available for the government towards this end is very limited and constrained, that we all understand that. So this is where I think the private sector will have to play a greater role. That's why I'm really happy that these private sector stakeholders are now coming on board and trying to allocate certain resources toward this agenda. The government also has a role in terms of creating a level playing field for private investment, and they should use fiscal policies to incentivize the engagement from the private sector. These policies include, for example, improving rules and regulations of green finance to seek green growth, establishing green financial institutions, green climate funds, designing code of conduct for green finance, developing new green financial products, and integrating into the global cooperative systems and setting up necessary infrastructure. The government can also play as a regulator or facilitator with limited resources. And then the final last topic that I will touch on is the collaboration of the central bank assistance green finance. We have also several schemes. So already we have certain schemes. For example, we have a department called Regional Development Department, which basically trying to disperse financing to certain areas where financing is not readily available. For example, SMEs, micro credit institutions, micro MSMEs, and certain areas. So using that instrument, we also can allocate some of the available resources towards that end. One example is basically after the tsunami, we had what we call Susahana loan scheme that helped a lot for some of the businesses. And also another example is the SME and Green Energy Global Loan Scheme that we have launched. Under this project, with assistance coming from globally, for example, for this one, European Investment Bank, since 2013 they have helped us. The central bank acted as a banker to the government in Sri Lanka, and we are working with PFIs to disperse the financing towards this agenda. And also there are certain several other schemes. I don't want to go into detail. I think earlier what we had what they call Enterprise Sri Lanka Loan Scheme, where there are a lot of schemes that we have been administrating to promote certain areas. That is on the providing, allocating some finances towards certain, but I fully admit that those are not sufficient. Financial resources will have to come in a greater, at an enhanced level. On the government side, I mentioned already the facilitation role, and also would like to recognize here government has also done certain things. For example, now one is the institutional framework, what we call Sustainable Development Act was introduced recently, and then under which there's what we call the established institution called Sustainable Development Council. This is to facilitate the achievement of national, regional, and international commitments. These are much broader, which is beyond the central bank, this thing. And there's also Sustainable Sri Lanka Vision Strategic Part for 2030 that is in line with the SDG goals. There are certain much broader agenda is also being introduced, and that is gaining attention, both the government and others. And obviously, the budgetary measures, you can see every year, even the budget announcement, and even if you look at the manifestos of these candidates that we had to the election, both candidates had this, what they call, talking about sustainability is one of the key. That's glad to hear, and I'm sure even the new president's manifesto, I have seen a lot of areas that they intend to promote the sustainability and achieving the SDG goals. So, that's one thing. And let me finally just talk about the implementation. How, at what stage, when it comes to our roadmap, it's basically there are few number of key stakeholders. Three regulators, the banks, non-bank financial institutions, and other insurance and other players. So it is the responsibility of all the institutions to embrace and support this view. Now so that's where, and also we have what we call the committee that we have appointed with stakeholders being participant in that, and we have a very clear coordination between all these different regulators in the finance sector that will help achieve the stipulated objectives and the targets of the roadmap that we have announced. Let me stop here, and I will discuss more on the other part during the session on taxonomy, more technical side, during the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
With Dr. Veerasinghe's presentation, we have now approached a point closer to what we might refer to as the nitty-gritty of this whole thing. So there will be an adjustment made on stage with the furniture being brought on, and that is in anticipation of our panel discussion, which in fact will seek to clarify many of the areas that are now needing to be clarified within the framework of our workshop today. A clear and detailed taxonomy, how? And there is a lack of clear definition, it has been thought, with regard to green and social projects. So this is the opportunity that there exists. Now, questions are welcome. Those of you who have a piece of paper, I think it's been provided, you need to use that to write down your question, and a representative from ICC will be present to accept those questions from you and then have them brought to our moderator on stage to deal with them in due course. However, if you wish, you can also raise your arm and seek to have a microphone brought to you where you are seated, and from that position you can even direct your questions when invited to do so. So these are the members of the panel, and we would like to invite them on stage now. We have Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, the Senior Deputy Governor, then too our special guest visiting from UNSCAP on this occasion, Dr. Subbanij, please, and then Mr. Vajra Vijay Guravardhana, who is the Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Mr. Ray Abeyvardena, Chairman of the Colombo Stock Exchange, Dr. Rohan Fernando, representing the private sector as well, from Aitken Spence Holdings PLC, its director. Then we have Mr. Advani, Nikhil Advani, who's the CEO of AIA Insurance, Lanka PLC, Mr. Sujiva Rajapaksha, Managing Director of BDO Partners, and of course our moderator will be the chairman of ICC Sri Lanka, Dinesh Virakuri. I'll hand it over to him now, and please, the panelists, do assemble on stage and sit where ye choose. Okay, so over to Dinesh.
Okay, we have 30 minutes, so please send up your questions. I can take it up in between. Can I start with you, Doctor? You talked a lot about responsible consumption and production, right? 300 million people go to bed without food every night, right? What kind of practices can be changed by bringing in more green finance into that area?
Yes, thank you. Actually, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, actually one of the goals that are lacking behind, yes, you rightly put, on responsible consumption and production. You look at the goals, right? It's kind of, what does it mean, responsible consumption and production? And I mean, if people are still poor, people are still lacking behind a lot of basic services, how would they think about sustainable development goals? I think that's actually something that I've always thought about. I'm actually haven't been with the UN for like a very long time. I just arrived at the UN less than 3 years ago. And I've always thought, if the UN is going to push for achieving the sustainable development goals, to meet those goals, it has to be aligned with the national agenda. So our approach is, unlike perhaps many organizations, our approach is that we would like to encourage the achievement of sustainable development goals, especially some of the goals that are lacking behind, by aligning with what the country is already doing in terms of their economic policy and financial policies. So it is important that we are not imposing the goals upon member states, but it is the member states who will be the driving seat to achieve these things, yes.
Dr. Nandala, can I turn to you? You mentioned that there's a lot of funds floating around. What can we do as a country to tap into that that pool?
Yeah, I think that's an important issue and also the challenge. We have seen globally there are a lot of funds being developed and established to promote provide finance for this area. But the difficulty in getting those funds basically is for these funds basically someone will have to ensure these funds are utilized and allocated for this purpose and need to be continuously monitored, that there will be an outcome in terms of sustainable development. So that's a difficult part. For example, now, when a bank finances a certain project, you look at the cash flow, you only look at the return on the investment. And after that, you don't need a lot of monitoring, and that's basically it's a different. But for this eligibility for this kind of funds, this is why we call what they call taxonomy, need to be developed, where the lender giving this money with an intent